my computer. Uh,
You've spoken with Mahesh?
yeah, I had a word with him. I interviewed him yesterday, so his bit is done. The photographs are going to come from him. I just have to tell
Right.
him who's available and doing the interview with us.
So are you speaking with Prashant Panjiar and Amit Mehra, and there were
So no,
three, four plus.
so we've sort of mixed the second and the third book and exhibition together.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there is Mr. Bhat, you, Mr. Mehra, Aparna, Sharmishta. We are trying to get Karen, but I'm not sure if she'll be available because she's not in India right now.
Okay. But with Zoom, everyone is everywhere. So.
Yeah, I like the only thing is we are not sure about her schedule because we contacted her for the last issue and she had her hands tied. So I was just wondering if she'll have the time for this or not.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So
So tell me, you had a few questions. You want me to go over that, or do you want me to ask? You want to ask me the questions now?
I don't mind asking you the questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Carry
All
on.
right. So for Unsung second volume, you have photographed your father-in-law, and you mentioned in the write-up that he's someone who lived in the moment. This is the only series where the photographer has selected somebody who's a relative. So what moved you to choose him? And also, I just couldn't understand if he's a writer, he's a journalist from his writer.
Okay, so Rajendra Yadav is my father-in-law, and he's actually one of the most famous Hindi literary writers of the last half a generation, I would say, for the last couple of generations. Besides being a writer and having done, many books and stories himself, he was over the last few decades famous for the fact that he was the editor of a magazine called Hans, which is a Hindi literary magazine. And amongst the Hindi literature circles, is considered to be the most prestigious magazine in which a person can get their work published. The other interesting thing about Hans is that it was actually started by Premchand, who also is a very famous Hindi writer in the 1930s. But after Premchand passed away, then the magazine closed down, and my father-in-law had revived the magazine I think about 30 odd years ago, and then continuously ran it till he passed away about 6 years ago. So that is what he is. He's a writer himself, and he was the editor of Hans magazine. So he was never a journalist, but a literary writer.
Okay.
And incidentally, as a matter of interest, my wife Rachna, who's actually a Kathak dancer herself, she decided that even if her father's passed away, she will not his legacy die, and took it on herself to become the publisher of the magazine. And there is an editor, Sanjay Sahai, who was actually nominated by Mr. Yadav that he will take over as the editor after he passes away. But Rachna made sure that not even a single issue of the magazine was missed even after her father had passed away, and has made sure it came out for the last 5 years continuously. And it's only with the COVID that for the first time that they've not had a paper issue, but even then they've continued with a digital format. So the magazine's been coming out every month, including the last three. She made sure that that doesn't suffer.
All right. What made you choose him to be your hero for this series?
Okay, couple of things that I am a typical. My background is I'm a photographer. I've been in advertising. I lived my life in Delhi. I worked in Bombay. And I'm the typical Indian middle class, upper middle class dude. All right, English speaking, English school. And over the years, fortunately for me, many years ago though, I realized that I am a minority in this country. But in spite of being a minority, we behave like we are the ones who have the right to run this country, and he's seen as the guys who are at the top of the pyramid. And I've always found that to be extremely strange and weird that a country which, even in spite of being independent, continues to allow this. And I think that is something which is so deeply uh, classist and casted, which allows India to operate in this way. And for people like us to still behave like, we are the ones who are the cream. Uh, Having said that, when I met my wife and through her met her parents, Mr. Yadav, and her mom, Manu Bhandari, is also a very famous writer, uh, I realized that in spite of the fact that, you know, I'm an Indian and these people are very famous writers, I hadn't heard about them. And, in, and there is this very large segment, especially of the Hindi speaking areas of India, amongst where they are household names. Their stories have been made into, films. There are people who swear by them, who think that they're gods, and here I was till I met my wife. I had no idea that, that there is this part of literature in India, which is called vernacular literature. Is also not, doesn't just exist; it flourishes. You know, so whether it's Hindi literature or whether it's Marathi or whether it's Gujarati or whether it's Bengali, uh, in India they are, because virtually every state is, because of the nature of the language, is almost like a country in itself. Uh, each of them have very vibrant and very, very flourishing, literary scenes. And Hindi, of course, being something which goes across 7 or 8, 10 states, really has a much larger footprint. Uh, Having said that, it still was very difficult for my father-in-law financially to run the magazine and sustain the magazine. Because now I tied back to my understanding of me being from advertising and me being from, the so-called cream of society, that largely advertisers, which is, as you know very well, being in the magazine trade, uh, a large part of the revenue for any magazine really comes from the advertising. Uh, and advertisers always have spent money on English medium magazines or newspapers in India, in spite of the fact that they probably have a circulation which is minuscule considering the number of magazines and newspapers which are printed in this country. All right. So constantly, he had a problem financially being able to support the magazine, because advertising only came from a few state governments or from, a couple of companies where.
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah. Now I can hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you went away
Do I need
after.
to?
Yeah, you went away after the state government. The
Okay,
advertising
so
comes.
so bulk of the advertising came from such sources, which meant, for a magazine, it was very difficult because at the end of the day, you can't survive entirely on subscription or, the price or the cover price. Uh, but in spite of that, he made sure that month after month, year after year, the magazine came out. And amongst the Hindi literature circles, it was considered to be ultimate honor to have your story vetted by Mr. Yadav, who made sure that he didn't just read stories and say, okay, this is good or this is bad, but actually worked with writers to make sure that their skills were honed, their vision was honed, uh, and if the story was in any way not quite up to the mark yet, but he felt that it had material and value, that he would work with the writers. So an entire generation of Hindi writers look upon Mr. Yadav as their mentor and as a person who encouraged them, trained them, and also gave them a platform where when the stories were published in Hans magazine. So I found that to be something which is actually bordering on the heroic, where a person has such a deep belief in what he's doing, and in spite of all the odds against him, especially financial and all that, uh, he was said, "This is my mission in life, and I'm going to do it." And he very merrily and very happily, and with great aplomb did that. And it wasn't just that he was bringing out a magazine. I mean, they were normal there were sammelans which were being done, there were meetings which were held, there were, there's an annual function which Hans does, which is considered to be one of the most prestigious places for any discussions to be happening. And those discussions both can be based on literature, can be based on the political situation, on the social situation. So, he actually created a environment and something which is much larger than just the magazine alone. And like I said, considering how difficult it is for vernacular language magazines to be able to even keep going, he made sure it didn't just keep going, but was considered to be highly prestigious. Uh, so that's why I thought that, why should I go looking for a hero outside when I have a hero right here in the house?
That's amazing. So did you have to really convince him to be a part of the project, or he just was happy to come on board with you?
He and I had a very interesting relationship. It was of great respect for each other and fairly adversarial, in the sense that he was an out and out communist. But I always used to say that you're a fraud communist because you love your whiskey and you love your pipe and you love the good things in life. But he was a huge champion, especially of Dalit literature and women literature, and spent the last couple of decades of his life really promoting that and giving a platform to that. And so there were two things which we had a kind of one. I am not fluent, as he was obviously in
Mm.
Hindi. So for the first couple of years after I got married, I used to be very tentative about discussing or talking to him, because I always felt that my Hindi is so bad that how I as a son-in-law can maul the language. But he was very cool about it, and then of course we built our equation, and our arguments, which used to be quite fiery at times. Uh, uh, it was fine. He used to speak in Hindi, I would speak in English, or I would slip into Hindi, and he didn't care, because he was the kind of person who went for the idea
Mm.
and who respected the concept. Uh, and what not just me, but a lot of people really respected about him was, besides being a connoisseur of literature, was the fact that he was so open-minded that he would, in a way, allow people or create an environment or atmosphere in which they would be forced to present their idea or thought, and would ask questions in a way that I would be made to think more about what I thought. So I always thought that that is something which, for a truly intelligent person, to my mind, is always, that has been the most important aspect, that a person is able to get the other person to think about their thinking
Mm.
or their concepts or their ideas in a way that they, by the end of a conversation, find more clarity in their own mind. And that is something which was, to my mind, one of his greatest strengths, really. And so we spent a lot of, time over the years and arguing and discussing, and all kinds of politics and economics and stuff like that. So uh, that's something which was one of the reasons why I thought he was a hero, and I wanted to. And besides the fact that he brought out the magazine and everything, so that's my relationship with him really over the years.
Okay.
Did that answer your question, or did I miss out on? Sorry, 1 second.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. My question was, did you have to really convince him to be a part of the project?
Okay, so sorry, yeah. So even in this, I mean, you know, he loved being photographed, and he loved being in the center of attention. And for instance, his birthday used to be this party where everyone in Hindi literature and
Mm.
politics and all would land up, and he really enjoyed that, because he was like a child.
Mm.
He just wanted a lot of people around, and he wanted the jalsa and all that. So, but अरे नहीं यार तू मेरी क्यों फोटो खींच रहा है मैंने क्या किया है वगैरह was his thing, but I knew that he was enjoying it, and he liked the fact that I thought he was a hero. uh, he would never say it,
Mm.
obviously, and he would never admit it, but he was, vain is not the word, but yes, he was, I think he felt it was a kind of a validation for him that his son-in-law thinks that he's a great man, which I truly believe that he is.
That's
So I had to kind of, logistically get him to agree,
mm,
but emotionally it was something which I could play around with. So
that's really
that's how it
nice.
went.
So I've noticed that, especially when I first opened the pictures, and the first picture was him with the pipe. That showed that he's someone who's powerful, who has an idea about what he's doing. He seems very strong-minded and confident. But there is another picture where he's sitting alone, where he's like, thinking about something. He's in his own world. And then the picture of that drawer where you can see his medicine. So there is also a vulnerable side to him, which I'm sure a lot of people don't get to see. So when you were thinking about the series, how did you want to portray it? Like, was this your idea, not to just show the kind of man he is, but also what goes on behind?
Uh, Good question, and absolutely, you picked out the three right photographs, because I think they, in a way, are indicative of something, but not necessarily totally
Mm.
openly, blatantly exposing the person. So the thought behind the photograph where he's smoking a pipe is that it was almost, like uh, some people get known for certain physical characteristics, like, for
Mm.
instance. And in his case, the fact that the pipe was always in his mouth and he was almost, if not smoking it, but it was there. That's normally what happens with people who smoke pipes. Unlike cigarette smokers, cigarette smokers smoke a cigarette and that's it. But a pipe smoker kind of holds onto the pipe. It becomes a part of it's just almost like a fifth limb,
Mm.
which was very true in his case. Uh, I used to be a smoker myself, but I'd quit about 20 years ago. And he and I used to always have this thing about, why don't you stop smoking? It's bad for you. And especially my wife, Rachnata, was very against it and used to constantly, including taking away his pipe and hiding it and all that. But he used to always have more pipes, because all his, chela chamchas used to get him pipes from koi America se le aaya, koi Russia se le aaya. So he had this lovely collection of pipes actually. But this particular, coming back to this photograph, for me, that smoke was more about, he was a man around whom concepts and ideas were constantly swirling. So I saw that smoke in a
Okay.
way figuratively rather than literally. Literally, of course, it's a man who smokes a pipe, and that's his persona, which I'm fine with because that's what comes through straight away. And anyone who knows him would see that photograph and say, "Ah, ye to Yadav Saab hai,"
Mm.
because the man, the pipe, the smoke, it was very much him. But for me, it went one step further that, like ideas and thoughts were constantly swirling around him, and conversations were constantly swirling around him. So that smoke, in a way, is almost like thought bubbles in my mind. And which is why in spite of being anti smoking, for me, that photograph, you know, meant that rather than, "Arey, ye to pipe peete rehte hain." So that's that one. Second, by the time did this particular story, he was into his 80s. Uh, he was by now very frail, uh, health-wise. He was a diabetic, uh, and it almost needed physical support to be able to get up, get around, etc. But his spirit never ever gave up. He was constantly laughing, joking, talking, discussing, arguing. Uh, and a lot of people didn't realize that this is, in spite of all that adversity, he was still carrying on. And his public dealings were always of this man who's full of ideas, who's full of the next story and, wanting to meet new people, etc. So when I was working on this story, so I kind of hung around with him in his office and at home for a few days and was without really thinking too much, wanted to photograph every aspect of his life, his day, his interactions, and everything. Uh, so I had, and he had to be, since he was diabetic and had various other issues also. So there was constantly this cachet of medicine which he had to be very careful about. And he used to not be very careful about taking them at the right time, etc. But he was pestered by a person who looked after him and my wife and everyone. दवाई ली कि नहीं अरे क्या करते हो दवाई क्यों नहीं लेते वगैरह you know. So again, like the pipe, this is also part of his life, but he was as blasé about that as he was about his pipe smoking. You know, though it was politically incorrect now to be a smoker, but he didn't care. And he didn't care about the fact that he had to take all these medicines to, you know, live a reasonably healthy life or whatever. So, and I thought that was as much an aspect of him and his strength as an individual. So I didn't see any reason why that should be hidden. To me, it actually came across as something which is his strength to be able to go on, rather than the fact that, oh my God, look at him, poor man, he has to depend on medicines. Yeah.
Okay. So, how long you had to photograph him? How long was this project on?
It was over a period of a couple of weeks, and I,
Hmm.
you know, kind of went to his office and hung around with him twice. Went to his house and was there. So it wasn't like a very extended period of time. Also because I, you know, knew his routine fairly well, and so knew exactly when I would, you know, would get good photographs of what I conceived as his life. Uh, so I must confess that I did come to the project with the preconceived notions,
Hmm.
which probably is the plus or the minus side of knowing the person. If, for instance, I'd looked at a hero who I'd heard about or read about, then I would have probably wouldn't have had preconceived ideas about how to project or portray the person photographically. In this case, there was a kind of a template in my mind, I must confess that. But he's a man who's rich enough in his behavior and his attitudes to, even within those templates, give me very interesting visuals.
Were there any limitations that you faced besides the fact that uh, that first you went with this template of what it should be, and then it changed with time? So, but besides that, did you face any other issues?
No, except like I said, you know, that he would at least, you know, half jokingly say, "अरे यार हो गई ना अब क्यों इतनी की फोटो खींच रहा है क्या कर रहा है पीछे पड़ गया," you know, like that. It was more a jocular, you know, kind of thing between us, and uh, so that was the only thing. I mean, he actually was quite happy being photographed, and which I did with, you know, lots of people used to come and meet him, hang around with him, and, you know, discuss their stories or just, you know, shoot the breeze. So I was there and, you know, participated in the entire thing, would put the camera down and just listen to the conversation, or, you know, get part to be part of the argument or whatever it was. Uh, Technically, yes, his room was always kind of, you know, not very well lit, and I didn't want to use a flash. Uh, so I was using technically now a very high ISO, and which I was quite happy with because I wanted the pictures to be a bit grainy, and I was very clear I'm going to shoot and use the photographs in black and white and not color. Uh, so no, it was not a challenge, but it was very interesting.
All right. During this period, was there any conversation or was there any particular incident that stayed with you?
You know, what stayed with me really is all what I told you about him,
Hmm.
and, you know, the fact that I've seen him through his life and how he was and how he interacted with people and how he interacted with ideas and how he encouraged thinking and, you know, arguments and discussions. Uh, so, like I said, that the days I did spend with him while I was photographing him, there were constantly someone or the other or some discussion happening, and for me that was, you know, like the bonus to the entire process of photographing him. So that stayed with me, and that, you know, this was always it was a great pleasure to find that he was still very much lively and, you know, engaged, and in spite of I knew the fact that, you know, son-in-law, that, you know, physically he's not keeping very well and that he is frail and everything, but in terms of his spirit, it was the spirit of a 30-year-old man. You know, it just kept going.
Um, So, did you get a chance to show him your work later on?
Yes, I did. Yes. Oh, he was
Okay.
very vain. He wanted to see his pictures.
What did he say
I mean,
there?
he liked them, and he actually was quite, fortunately for me, he was quite proud of the fact that as a photographer, and he used to tell people that हिंदी में नहीं आती इसको but फोटो अच्छी खींच लेता है. So
My
say
God.
that yeah, literature and all, he doesn't know anything. He's useless, but he has his own language photography, and he does that well.
That's so sweet. All right. Okay, I have done everything now, what I need for the interview. But in case if I have any other question that comes up when I'm transcribing, then I'll just give you a call or SMS you.
Yeah, yeah,
Thanks.
anytime, anytime.
All right.
Most welcome.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
sir.
And if you can send me a copy of this recording, I really appreciate that. I like Rachna to hear it.
Okay, sure, sure. I'll just send it to you.
Whenever you think
Yeah, yeah.
it's okay, you send me a copy. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much,
Okay.
sir.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks. All the best. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.